Hi, I'm Gregory Hodgson. I'm here at the 2018 Canadian Science Policy Conference with Dr. Tom Corr, the President and CEO of the Ontario Centres of Excellence. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start by asking you, in your extensive experience in both ICT, venture capital, and the private sector, what do you see as the greatest challenge in making Canada a global leader in the technology industry?
I think over the last few years, perhaps over the last 5 years for sure, we've done a great job of getting the very early stage innovation ecosystem going in terms of engaging industry and entrepreneurs and the venture capital investment community with universities, colleges and research hospitals, those people that tend to have new and novel IP coming out of them that have the potential to be commercialized and to grow the innovation sector in general. I think where we're still a little bit weak is on a couple of fronts. First of all, we don't have a lot of the repeat successful entrepreneurs that you have in Silicon Valley, where you'll talk to some startups down there and the CEO or the founder or the founders are in fact at their third or fourth. And even if some of them are failed, they're at it again. And in the US, the failure, the learnings that they got from the failure isn't viewed as a negative. It's okay, I'm much smarter than I was doing the last one, it's time to do it again. And we don't have a lot of their repeat entrepreneurs in Canada. Either they've gone to the States and haven't come back, or they've gone to the States and they're laying on a beach somewhere. So having that talent, especially around general management, marketing, and creating huge sales organizations to create the companies that are in the $1,500 million is lacking to some degree. And I think the support for companies once they get past the I've got my first product, I'm a startup, I've got 10 customers and I'm doing a few $1 million a year in revenues, and really scaling it up, again, that comes down to the support that the companies need, from everything from technical help to people help again, and helping them move forward, and international connections that could use. There's still a lack of support and experience and skills in those areas that I think would really help catapult these companies to being large, successful international companies. Although certainly the pipeline there is there in terms of creating the companies that will be scaled up, the ones that will, and very few will, but those are the ones we should focus on and help move forward, and there's still a bit of a gap there.
So would you say that your perspective has changed now that you're an executive of the Ontario Centres of Excellence versus, say, when you were an entrepreneur in the private sector?
Yeah, very much so, because when I was an entrepreneur in the private sector, I had no feeling for what was going on at universities or colleges or research hospitals in general in terms of the applied research that was underway and the IP that was being created and the opportunities to move that IP forward, nor did I realize how much was available in terms of access to the students that actually wanted to work in startup companies that I was involved with and get that real world experience and the kind of skill set they could bring. Back in my days as an entrepreneur, it was a lot about communications, it was about IT and building big enterprise applications. These days there's a lot more focus on AI and big data and so on. But nevertheless, that skill set is at the academic institutions, and I wasn't really aware of that. But I think the way the ecosystem is set up now in Canada, and in particular in Ontario, I think anybody who wants to learn more of what's available, all that's available, the programs are available to connect industry with the academic institutions, and that wasn't available when I was much younger, but it is now, and I would really encourage people to make those connections and use those resources.
So I wanted to ask you about something, and I think the panel session that you're involved in this afternoon will likely touch on this subject, and that's about the true value of innovation for Canada. Like, how do we effectively commercialize Canadian innovation and mitigate the risk that publicly funded research and innovation, once brought to market, is going to ultimately end up with intellectual property that's owned by and acquired by foreign multinational companies that are really dominating the tech industry?
Yeah, and that's a big problem. And I think it comes back to the issue of support for the startups, because startups don't necessarily exist and want to be acquired by some foreign company. They do it because they're frustrated because they can't get the financing that they need, especially at a later stage when they're looking for 20 or 30 or 40 million dollars worth of financing to move them ahead and keep them in Canada. So the ones that are out there, and the successful ones are known to everybody, get approached by the foreign multinationals, and that's the exit for these companies because they can't continue on in Canada and realize the growth of the wealth creation that comes from being a Canadian company, which is unfortunate. So that's one of the things. I think in terms of protecting the IP, I think we're a lot wiser about that than we were before, right from the university level going forward. So it does need to be protected, and those resources are certainly available to companies to do that. But I think that in terms of the IP being snapped up, at OCE at least, we have a policy that if we fund a project with a company and IP is created out of it, which it typically is, because usually it's engagement between an academic institution and a company, be it a big one or a small one. If the commercialization of that IP happens outside of Canada, in other words, the company moves or the IP gets acquired, then the funding that we provided has got to come back to us. Okay. So that's a bit, but at the end of the day, you can't stop the free market from working. And if somebody comes to an entrepreneur and gives them a huge payday in terms of an exit strategy, paying OCE back for the little bit of money they may have provided to help create the IP isn't going to stop them, and nor should it. I mean, people should be free to do whatever they want, but the frustration is a lot of money, and taxpayers' money, and university and college and research hospital resources get used to create this IP, and then the commercialization of it and the economic good that comes from it, of course, happens somewhere else, and that happens too common. We see it all the time at OCE where companies get picked off and moved away, and we got to do more to support those companies to give them less reasons to have to move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as you say, I mean, you support the companies and everyone's free to do, you know, what they need to do, but the ultimate economic benefit often leaves Canada. So I guess to follow up, I would ask, what other types of science policy measures can we make, or what strategies can we use to help support those startup companies in the next stage to keep the IP here, to keep the economic benefit in Canada?
Well, again, I think that there should be, you know, a financial incentive if the government has funded some of this IP development, which has been protected. If it leaves Canada, there should be some sort of protection to not have it leave if the taxpayer has got an investment in it without seeing some return on it, first of all. And sometimes it's as simple as this. Sometimes a Canadian company gets sold, the shareholders are Canadians, they get a huge capital gain from it, so a lot of money goes back to the feds and to the province through the taxes that has to be paid on that. But that shouldn't be a strategy. I mean, that just happens by default. But the strategy should be to keep them here and keep the IP here and commercialize it here. And I think that's where the focus should be. And I think it really comes down to providing more support for these startups that are scaling up and growing very quickly to make sure that there's no reason for them to leave. I think in the earlier stages, in terms of just protecting the IP period, so nobody it doesn't just disappear or get stolen or copied. You know, there's lots of resources at the universities and advice through the offices of research and the tech transfer offices and the campus linked accelerators, especially in Ontario, and the regional innovation centers. There's no end to mentoring and advice and support one can get. So there's no reason not to do that, but some people just aren't aware of it, and they just aren't aware of the value of IP. And they say, gee, I can either make payroll on Friday, or I can hire some lawyer to protect my IP. So sometimes the decisions are just as binary as that. So, but nevertheless, they should at least try and protect their IP as much as they can. If for no other reason, the more IP they've got, the more patented IP that they have, the more valuable the company's going to be in the eyes of investors. So if you're trying to attract Canadian investors and you want to get a valuation as high as you can in terms of giving away the minimal amount of equity, having IP and IP protection shows a couple of things. You've got IP to protect, and secondly, you've got the maturity as an entrepreneur to think about that stuff and do it, both of which are valued quite highly by investors.
That's really insightful. So we're doing a lot then in that sort of first stage in supporting the generation of IP and moving towards protecting the IP and offering a lot of resources, but where we really need to improve is the scaling up of those small and medium enterprises when they're ready to go to the next stage.
Yeah, and giving them less reason to leave. And it'll never be perfect, and some people may want to leave to go to California because of the weather, and if they do, so be it. But at the end of the day, the more we can do to support the majority of the companies are quite happy to stay in Canada. People are here, they've got families here, they've got kids here, they like the Canadian system of living as opposed to a foreign one. But at some point in time, they'll make a business decision and they'll follow the money. That's what we find. And they're not going to not leave Canada if the advantage of going somewhere else is so significant. And they've got all these employees they've got to look after, and they've got their own personal wealth and investment in time and money they've got to look after. So that's what's going to drive them somewhere else. But again, the less reasons you can leave, give them to leave, the better.
Yeah. So then what do you see as the greatest value of the Canadian Science Policy Conference?
I think that the big value is frankly bringing government people, both provincial and federal folks from across Canada, the industry, the science community, and the investment community together and hear from each other what their concerns are, what their common themes may be, and try to address things holistically with all those people in the room, as opposed to the academics will have one approach, just give me more money for research, that's all we need. Companies will say, well, if I could just get cheaper capital or easier access to capital, that's all I need. But everybody's got their own requirements and their own needs. So I think getting everybody together in a room and sharing ideas goes a long way to making everybody sensitive to what the other partners in your success are going to be. And I think that's the big advantage of the conference.
Great, thank you. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to join us and to lend us your perspective. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your stay at the conference.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for speaking with me. It was really nice to meet you.